Thank you so much for coming to the James Bond Book Club. So to start, could you just introduce yourself and this book, A Spy in the Blood?
Yeah, of course. So my name is Paul Warner. The Spy in the Blood is it's a piece of espionage fiction which I wrote a couple of years ago, I suppose now, featuring a character called Mark Wolf. He was once the greatest spy of his generation, quite well known within the service. He's currently now working in recruitment. When we meet him at the beginning of this, he's working in recruitment, and his daughter has ambitions of becoming a secret agent or an intelligence officer, and he's, for very obvious reasons, not best pleased about this. So he does his best to sort of try and dissuade her, but she's quite headstrong and she can't be dissuaded. She becomes a spy, and she sort of treks off to the Middle East and various places, and then she goes missing on a mission. And the story is about Mark, who's very much an analog spy in a digital world, trying to work out what's happened to her and his own place in this new kind of landscape of sort of modern espionage. But I wanted to write about someone who's actually sort of approaching retirement age, who is kind of thrust into that sort of world. The idea just sort of perversely just appealed to me. What would a man of those years actually, how would he act, if he was running from danger and his knees are giving in? And I just thought, how would someone actually cope? And the family drama element was quite important for me as well. I wanted to kind of to have him worried about offspring as well. And I don't know, it kind of came together quite organically. It feels quite organic now I think about it, but I know I kind of struggled with the first couple of drafts before it really came together.
It definitely comes together. I feel like those two things that you're talking about, Mark a as a character and as a spy, I feel like there was so much interesting stuff about where his identity starts and stops as a person and as a spy. The line that you draw is so well done. And then bringing in Jodie and the like father-daughter dynamic meant you have all these brilliant questions about like his morality and who his loyalty is to, his family or the service. So I think like having those two themes side by side made it feel like such a whole piece.
In a way, that's Mark's undoing, because
Mm,
who is he going to trust? Is he going to trust his instincts? Is he going to trust his daughter, which are kind of one and the same thing, I suppose? Or is his
mm,
loyalty to the service, which it has mostly always been, in a way that could be seen as his undoing?
mm.
His inability to kind of realize that those two issues are actually completely separate, if that makes sense. He's almost chasing glory, or he's also chasing his youth, I suppose. Yeah, it all can go quite wrong, I think.
Well, it feels like a really fresh take on this genre, actually. Like you've got sort of all the action and the setting, and like the plot moves really fast and it's really gripping. But those kind of personal questions and personal ties aren't something that are normally examined so closely. Was that something you were consciously doing?
Yes and no. I mean, I think once I had the characters, they they told me where the story was going to go, and because there was a father-daughter dynamic, which actually isn't a huge part of the book, as you know, but they're in it together early on, and then they're separated for obvious reasons. It kind of had to be about how he kind of copes with her disappearance and things like that. So it wasn't really something that was going to be at the heart of it, that the sort of family ties. But as I say, once I knew the daughter was going to be a big part of his story, there was no way I could kind of avoid it. So early on, you've sort of got, he goes from kind of dinner parties that he doesn't really enjoy, and sort of you've got the kind of humdrum office life and all the rest of it. And I suppose in a way that has to juxtapose with the sort of the bangs and explosions and fist fights that one expects, I suppose, from this sort of genre. So yeah, I had to try and marry the two, because it was very much a book of binary opposites in that sense.
On the genre, like more generally, what first drew you to write in this world?
I've always been fascinated by spy fiction. I mean, it's a genre I'm really very, very interested in. My first memory is watching Live and Let Die. I can't have even been three, and I've gone back and I've looked at when this would have been, and it would have been the world premiere in this is how old I am, in 1981. I remember being so petrified of sort of Baron Samedi on the back of this train, and my dad had to kind of carry me up to bed. And I read all the Flemings, I think, when I was probably far too young, really, sort of 9 or 10. I've just always wanted to write spy novels, but never did. I've always been fascinated by the concept of secrets and sort of conspiracies, and I think we as a species just are. The idea that you can sort of peel back the curtain and kind of find out some sort of truths about the world, and quite unpleasant truths sometimes. And it's a very potent thing, I think, to live vicariously through these characters who are able to kind of fight for justice and all the rest of it. When it does seem sometimes as though the world can be juxtaposingly, I suppose, sort of minutely controlled and at the same time quite fragile by forces that we don't understand. And Ambler did the same sort of thing, and Green did it. This idea that the everyman can be a hero, where you start off at the beginning of a story completely out of your depth, but then by the end of it, you're sort of taking on sort of professionals, and you can go toe to toe with forces that perhaps would normally crush us. But yeah, it's always appealed to me, and I wanted to kind of add my voice to it, essentially.
It's interesting that those authors that you mentioned are all like writing in a different time, but
Yeah.
your book is really rooted in today. Yeah, I was wondering if that created any challenges, because obviously the idea of secrecy in this world that we live in now is so different, but I feel like that was really cleverly incorporated into your story. This was like perfectly realistic yet so adventurous.
We live in a strange world. We live in a world of sort of fake news and disinformation and tech that I barely know how to refresh websites. That there's probably a bit of Mark in me, but the richest man on the planet owns so much of social media. I find it quite worrying, to be honest with you. But there's something quite romantic about the idea of, I don't know, like someone sliding a manila folder over a cafe top in Warsaw or something. You could go back to the sort of analog ways of spying. Do you know what I mean? Like this idea that we can actually control the world through old-fashioned means, and that's what Mark's all about. He's a rain-jacketed anachronism. He's out of his depth. There's no way he can sort of try and fight in the modern world. The idea of the society we're living in now sort of being under threat, I think, is quite a potent one.
How did you choose where to set the action of this story? Because I feel like that's also relevant to what you were just saying. I don't know, did you have any sort of more thematic ideas when you were choosing where to set the story?
It was more about the time that it was set. So I set it in 2017. To me, that felt like around about the time when things started to fall apart. It was the beginning of sort of Trump's first term, I think it was, and there was the Brexit referendum, and there was a lot going on in this country and globally, and I wanted to set it in a fairly contemporary world, but it's not quite today. That gave me a sort of bit of a buffer zone, I think. The biggest thing that was going on in 2017 was Afghanistan. To send an old spy who's kind of past his prime back into hell, essentially, to me, that seemed like the most logical place to put him.
Everyone that he meets has such a complicated relationship with their allegiance, which I feel like for me was like really at the heart of the book.
A lot of people he meet are very deceitful, and this is obviously one of the tropes of spy fiction. And you have to know when you're going into these things as a reader, someone is going to betray you. There's going to be some traitorous act. I think it was important to have him doubting everyone. He can barely trust himself, Mark Wolf. So he goes through this whole experience almost on the back foot, I suppose. But that's what spy fiction does. It's twists and turns. It's like a chess game on paper, I think. So you want to create a world that is shadowy, and I suppose where people are untrustworthy. So you're right. I think it is all about deception. He doesn't know where to tread. But he's certain of one thing, and that's that his daughter is on the right side.
There are so many twists and turns and changing allegiances, plotting out your story or writing your book. How do you make those decisions?
I don't know that I do, to be honest. I try to plan, because I've written books before that have gone off piece, skied off piece a little bit. So I think I'll never do it like that again, and I'm going to plan it intricately. And then about a week into writing, it all just goes and it just becomes new and different and I'm completely unexpected. The characters tend to inform where the story goes. Ultimately, they have the control over me. I don't. I do plan it, and I have an end point in sight normally, but very often the journey from the beginning to the end gets completely corrupted by the characters themselves, which is quite frustrating. And for 90% of the writing process, I'm thinking this has gone so far from where I wanted it to be. The first draft is hell on toast. I really enjoy editing, so after that, it becomes a pleasure. The problem with the first draft is that you've got to get it out quite quickly, I think, because I don't enjoy it. But at the same time, I know that the person or the future me editing it and writing the second, third, fourth, 17th draft, whatever it is going to thank the person who wrote it in the first place. You do have to invest quite a lot in that first draft, which is why I don't like it. I think because I know it has to be okay, the first draft, for the next draft to be better. And I have a really annoying process at the moment, if you can even call it a process, which is I binge write that first draft over the summer, and I'll try and write about 4,000 words a day, which is a ludicrous amount. I'm quite lucky because my partner will take our kids and she's Italian, so they'll go to Italy for like 2-3 weeks, something like that, and I stay here. I'll get up, I'll write 1,000 words. I'll have breakfast, I'll write 1,000 words. I'll have lunch, do 1,000. Dinner 1,000, whatever. That's how I kind of pace my day, and I force myself to write 4,000 words. And by the end of the summer, I've got quite a chunk of it ready. And then the next 10 months is basically spent fine tuning that process. But even at the very last minute, I'm thinking this is not anywhere there. And then there's that kind of magical moment where it does kind of click into place, and you think, wow, did I do that? That's amazing. But every book is different, I suppose. And every book is equally different. The second one came about a lot easier than the first one for some reason. So Funeral for a Spy is coming out January 27, and that, in retrospect, seemed to be already there. I just had to write it, and it needed some polishing, but it arrived far more fully formed than the first one did for some reason. And the third one, which I've presumptuously gone ahead and written anyway, despite any kind of sales figures, was almost a mixture of those first two in styles. I had what I thought was the story, and then it just went off in a completely different direction, and it was me wrestling it back into some kind of shape. And I think I got there.
It's actually really reassuring to hear that the second came more easily than the first, because you often hear the opposite.
I wrote the second just because I didn't want to leave those characters. I felt like there was more
Yeah.
story to be told, and I didn't have that horrible sort of fear of anyone feeding back what they thought about the first one to me. Like, I hadn't had any reviews on the first one. I hadn't sold it to anyone. I don't think I had an agent when I finished the first one, and I just thought, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to write now. Oh, I'll write the second one. Once you start hearing people say, yeah, but that bit didn't work so well, that was a bit pedestrian, or I could have done with more of that, then it goes in your head and you start, maybe I'll start to add that sort of stuff. So I didn't have anything like that. I just wrote the sequel that I wanted to write, and that, for me, that was quite liberating.
I'm excited about number two.
I'm excited for people to read number two, actually. The second book carries on with the kind of family drama idea.
Yeah.
And we're much quicker into the action. I don't think there was no need to kind of set up his life. So it's more like in the Bond tradition of he gets his mission and off he goes.
How do you feel about Mark as a character? Do you feel like you know him really well, and do you feel fondly for him now?
I feel like he's always existed.
I think he's so great. I love his like sense of humor, but also I think he's got really good shades of light and dark. He just like really came to life for me.
Oh, I'm glad. I mean, he came fairly easily, I think, and I wouldn't say he's an extension of me, but as a writer, how could he not be? There's every character is an element of myself, I suppose. I'm not a spy, nor have I ever been a spy. I think I'd make an awful spy, anything I know about spycraft is I've kind of picked up from things I've read or things I've watched. So I made up a lot of stuff about Vauxhall House, for example.
I'm quite surprised actually because there were some bits about MI6 and the officers. I was like, you definitely know what you're talking about. Like, you even said that I wrote the windows were made from 25 types of glass. There's just a lot of like little details that made me think it was really well researched.
A lot of research did go into it. I'm not going to lie, there was a lot of research, but it is the little details that adds that very similitude to a story. Without the details, I think it's quite difficult to kind of propel things along. Fleming did a very similar thing. A lot of his stories were preposterous, but because he was really focused on what was being eaten or what was being worn or what was being driven, we kind of went along with that with the story. I think the beginning of From Russia with Love is there's sort of like a 5, 6, 7 page description of how someone is massaging Red Grant. That's how the book opens. It's getting a massage. Attention to detail, I think, is really crucial. By the same token, I think readers can be quite forgiving. You can paint some things with quite a broad brushstroke. If you use your powers to make certain elements as detailed as you possibly can early on, then I think a lot of your work is done. Life becomes a bit easier as a writer if you can nail those details.
Do you think that's something that comes naturally to you, or have you had to hone it?
I think I've honed it. If you read my Juvenilia, you'd know that it didn't come naturally to me first, in the first place. So I don't know. I don't know. I think I think you have to work on it.
And do you think being so well versed in other writers in this genre has made it easier or harder to find your own voice?
That's a really good question, and I don't really know. I think someone who read my first attempt at a novel, well, a novel that I had published in another life, I remember them saying to me, "Oh, it sounds like you. It really sounds like your voice." And I took that as a compliment. The same person read this one and said, "But it doesn't sound like you at all. It really sounds like Mark. You've really created this character." And I took that as a compliment as well. So I think, yeah, I've probably grown as a writer, and I think Mark Wolf has probably helped me in a way. Living vicariously through someone else is what spy fiction is all about, isn't it? From your sofa or your bed or your train carriage, you can kind of live these. You can run into danger.
Can you say any more about how he is and isn't an extension of you? What do you have in common?
Inevitably, I'm going to share some characteristics with him. Otherwise, I'm inhabiting the soul of someone entirely invented, which is too big a
Right.
task. We share similar opinions and maybe similar interests. I mean, Mark's been through quite a lot. There's sort of various addiction issues in his life, which I think I've largely avoided. I mean, I do like, Kit Kats.
Do you think the modern day world that we live in now makes the idea of spying more intriguing? Do you think spy fiction is having a bit of a moment?
We're not in the golden age. I wouldn't have thought of the 50s and 60s. And there are parallels with then and now. This sort of distrust of authority and geopolitical events, which almost feel a bit out of our control. I think there are some writers that will endure from now. I think Mick Herron will be read in 20, 30 years. I think David McCloskey will be read in 20, 30 years. I think there are fairly sort of insidious reasons for why spy fiction is back in such a big way. We've kind of got our old enemy back in a way. We thought the Cold War had ended, of course, but I think there were men in the Kremlin that never really thought that way. And the invasion of Ukraine was a big shock to people. And obviously also the disinformation and multimedia and all the rest of it as well is something that people are a little bit sort of worried by. We are living in strange times, I think, and that perhaps that's why there's been a resurgence. I don't think we're living through anything that's as turbulent as it was, to go back to Fleming during his period of writing. When was his first book? 53, I think, Casino Royale. Bond is a sort of post-war, very nationalistic, quite sort of cocky and arrogant, and but then by 56 you had the Suez crisis, and then the empire, not overnight, but started to sort of crumble. And by the time that his last book came out, which I think was 66. I know he was dead by then. The Labour landslide victory, and we got the pill and abortion rights. The death penalty was abolished, and then we got the Summer of Love, and like things were so huge. We went from rationing to hippies and football and art and architecture and music exploded. So that was all within the literary bond's lifetime. I don't think the last 10 years competes with that as a kind of explosion of culture. There are parallels if you think about the pace of change, and maybe that's got something to do with why we're picking up spy fiction again. I don't know.
It's a weird mixture, isn't it, of needing these real events to like tack these stories onto, but also the stories by nature are so escapist. Why are we making such like fun books out of these like scarier times?
What else can we do? Again, it goes back to the idea of living vicariously through these characters, because we have the agency and the power, I suppose, to sort of change the outcome of real life. And it's all out of control. We can't stop bombs falling any more than James Bond could. So the idea that that lone person can go out into the world and make a difference is a really powerful one. Some books are fun, some books are not so fun. I think they should be exciting. I think you want at least to get to the end of them. I think you've obviously failed as a writer if someone gives up halfway through because it's too depressing. But that doesn't mean that people can't cope with some jolts and shocks and twists and turns. And I hope that's what A Spy in the Blood does towards the end.
I was also just thinking again about Mark. There's a lot in there about how being a spy is like completely ingrained in his personality. And we talked at the beginning about like who his loyalties with, his country and his service or his family. Do you think being a spy is that deeply ingrained in the people that do it? Or do you think that is something that people that write about espionage are like telling themselves? Because it's quite a Bond thing, isn't it? This like he doesn't have much more of a personality other than his job and his role.
Yeah, I think that's very true. He's criticized by members of his family who don't know he's a spy necessarily. He didn't feel the need to tell them this because by the time he had a family, he'd quit. So there was never any need to kind of go on the record. But he's still got that thing in him where he has to face the door in a restaurant, or he has to look both ways up the street before he draws the curtain on in his daughter's bedroom. So it never leaves him. You're right. Spy. I'm not a spy, but I think spies are innate storytellers as well, because they have to come up with legends and they have to come up with aliases. And I think it's part of a spy's DNA to lie. There's something. Your job is to be deceitful, and that's stuck in Mark, I think. So as we meet him through the course of this book, and it's set over a couple of years, actually, because his daughter goes through the recruitment process, and we sort of follow that. He doesn't really mellow. He's desperate to kind of get back in the field. You can tell that early on. There is something in these characters that it's quite tragic, I suppose. The fact that he can't move on and he can't become a new version of himself. He's always kind of chasing, or he's still chasing that sort of Mark Wolf of yesteryear.
And then there's this idea that that's something that Jodie inherits. There are lots of references to him kind of passing it on to her or
Yeah.
imbuing her with it from
Yeah.
birth, basically. But then there's also the concept that it's kind of like sexuality, like something that you're given
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
rather than something you go into.
It's the whole nature nurture thing, I suppose. Like, why are some people able to sing and other people can't? I couldn't sing. If you trained me for 25 years, I wouldn't be able to sing. Jodie was almost like born to be an intelligence officer, but why? Was it the kind of way sort of Mark raises her, even though he doesn't mean to? She's sort of following in his footsteps. And that fascinated me as well. The idea that are we destined to become our parents, and is that our reward or is that our punishment? And Jodie may or may not rebel against that idea, But Mark is absolutely appalled that he's foisted these idiosyncrasies onto her. And part of him wants to blame genetics because it's like, well, it's out of my hands. It's just it was in me, so it's in her as well. And the other part of him is wrapped with this terrible guilt because she could have just been raised normally, but he's somehow he's infected her with this sort of this spycraft.
That's why I think this actually is a really literary book. There's something that's like so literary about the way that you write, and it's asking those questions and the family dynamics and the characters being so realistic.
One of the criticisms that was leveled at Fleming was that he was a snob, but he was
Mm.
writing what was considered at the time, pulp fiction. So I'm very happy to marry those two genres.
With something like the nature nurture question, is that something that you have in mind when you start writing a book like this? Or does that come somewhere further in the process?
I don't remember ever sitting down and thinking that must be something that I want thematically to run through the story. It probably appeared by necessity, really. You can't really avoid that question when you're looking at those characters. But I didn't sit down to write a sort of a treatise on parenthood or even the nature of spying or the human condition. It happened. But when I look back on the writing process, I don't remember any of it, to be honest. It just happens, really. It's almost like someone else wrote it. The process of writing is so far removed from the process of editing, it seems sometimes, that those original ideas are just lost. I often don't know where the ideas come from.
And just going back to the writing process quickly, how different is the first draft from the third draft, given you enjoy the editing process so much?
It depends on the book, actually. But the one I'm working on at the moment, when I get the time, I didn't really change a huge amount. The first draft was about 140,000 words, and I cut it down to about 95,000 words. So the process of removing stuff tightened it. And then obviously you have to move a few things around. I think with A Spy in the Blood, there was a lot of moving what I thought was the opening chapter back to like chapter 3 and things like this. So there was a lot of chopping it about. Structurally, I made lots of changes.
Do you find it hard to let go when you have to take things out?
Yes. What tends to happen is there'll be like a folder on the laptop of all like the errata and all the stuff that you've taken out, and you put it there, and you think, I'll feed that in again because I like that writing. It doesn't work, it doesn't fit, but I will come back to it at some point. And none of it ever does. It's gone for a reason, and you end up just jettisoning the lot. So you mourn it briefly because you spend some time writing it, but at the end of the day, no one needed to read that because it doesn't fit, it doesn't work.
This is something I was wondering about with Jodie, actually, because she's a very big presence, but you never know very much about her. I can picture her and I can hear her voice, but I feel like you've really cleverly left out bits of what makes her her so that we're
Yeah.
constantly questioning, right?
And that's because, and again, I don't want to spoil anything, that's because Mark never really knew her, I suppose. In the very first chapter, he comes home and she's there on the stairs, and he thinks, I forgot she was home this weekend. He's not the parent he thinks he is. I think by the end of it, we get a sense of who she is, but I don't think Mark's, as a father, ever quite knows her, if that makes sense.
Thank you so much. It's been really good to talk to you.
Thank you very much. You too. Thank
Thanks.
you.
We'll have a really good day.
You too. Thank you very much.
Okay.